long before scoreboards and stadiums, before championship trophies and televised finals, human beings were already doing something remarkable. They were playing, not just fighting, not just surviving, playing. In the dust of Mesopotamian courtyards, in the shadowed halls of Egyptian tombs, in the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, people carved boards into stone, shaped dice from bone, and built games that would outlast empires. This is not just a story about entertainment. This is a story about who we are. Consider this. Games are one of the oldest forms of human expression on Earth. Older than most written languages. Older than most religions still practiced today. And in many cases, far older than the civilizations we associate them with. Think about that for a moment. When we picture ancient history, we picture war. We picture conquest, kings, and monuments built by the sweat of thousands. But underneath all of that, quietly, persistently, there was play, there was strategy, there was laughter around a carved board, and tension over a rolling die. And the interesting part? Many of these games weren't just pastimes. They were spiritual rituals. They were battlefield training. They were symbols of power, status, and even the afterlife itself. One game found buried beside a pharaoh was believed by ancient Egyptians to determine the fate of a soul in the next world. Another, played by Roman soldiers, may have sharpened some of the tactical thinking used in actual campaigns, though historians still debate how directly the two connected. So how did a simple grid of squares end up buried in royal tombs? How did a dice game played by Mesopotamian merchants 5,000 years ago end up shaping the DNA of modern backgammon? And why do so many of these ancient games, invented in completely different corners of the world, by people who never met, who spoke different languages, worshiped different gods, end up looking strangely, almost impossibly similar? That question is worth sitting with. Over the next few minutes, we're going to travel across 4,000 years of human history. From the royal courts of ancient Ur to the war camps of Rome, from the frozen villages of Viking Scandinavia to the sacred temples of India, where a single board game would one day evolve into something the entire world now recognizes. We'll look at which games were designed for kings, which ones were designed for war, and which ones carried secrets historians are still trying to fully understand today. Because the truth is this: humanity's fascination with games isn't a modern invention. It's ancient, it's primal, and it might just reveal something about human nature that's easy to overlook. Let's go back to where it all began. Our story begins in the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, around 2600 BC. Here, in the ancient city of Ur, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary in the 1920s. Buried inside royal tombs was a small wooden board, inlaid with shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli. It became known as the royal game of Ur. For decades, no one knew exactly how it was played. The pieces were there, the board was there, but the rules had vanished into history. Then, in the 1980s, a British museum curator named Irving Finkel discovered something remarkable: a cuneiform tablet, over 2,000 years old, that actually explained the rules. A game's instruction manual, buried for millennia, finally deciphered. And what's genuinely striking is this: when Finkel demonstrated the rules, people around the world realized this ancient race and capture game was still, in some form, being played by Jewish communities in India, passed down for generations, largely unaware of its 5,000-year-old origin. Around the same era, in ancient Egypt, another game was quietly shaping the spiritual imagination of an entire civilization. Senet, dating back to roughly 3100 BC, appears painted on tomb walls and carved into temple reliefs. It wasn't just entertainment. Egyptians believed the journey across the Senet board mirrored the soul's journey through the afterlife. Winning wasn't just about skill, it was about securing safe passage into eternity. Alongside Senet, Egyptians also played Mehen, a spiral board shaped like a coiled serpent, believed to represent a protective deity. Unlike Senet, historians still debate exactly how Mehen was played, since detailed instructions were never fully preserved. That gap in the record has fascinated Egyptologists for over a century. Meanwhile, thousands of miles east, ancient China was developing games of its own. Liubo emerged around 1500 BC, a strategic board game so popular it was even depicted in Han Dynasty tomb figurines, showing two players locked in concentration. In around 2300 to 2000 BC, another Chinese game began taking shape, one considered by many historians to be the oldest board game still played in something close to its original form today. Its name? Go. Here's what makes this pattern worth pausing on. While Go was developing in China, and Senet was guiding souls in Egypt, and the royal game of Ur was entertaining Mesopotamian royalty, these civilizations had no meaningful contact with each other. No shared trade routes connecting them at that stage. No shared language. No shared religion. And yet, independently, across three completely different corners of the ancient world, human beings arrived at strikingly similar ideas: grids, dice, strategy, and the thrill of chance. That's not likely to be coincidence. And it's only the beginning of the pattern we're about to trace. As civilizations grew, so did the complexity of their games, and so did the stakes behind them. In ancient India, a game called Ashtapada emerged, played on an 8x8 grid. At first glance, it looks unremarkable, but historians consider it one of the more important boards in gaming history, because centuries later, that same 8x8 layout would become the foundation for one of the most iconic games ever created. We'll get to that shortly. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Rome was building an empire through conquest, and alongside it, playing strategy games that echoed the battlefield. Around the 1st century BC, Roman soldiers played Latrunculi, a game whose name translates roughly to little soldiers or brigands. Pieces moved across a grid, capturing enemy pieces through calculated positioning. Some historians suggest this wasn't just entertainment for legionnaires. It may have reinforced tactical thinking, though the direct link to actual battlefield strategy is more speculation than settled fact. Still, it's worth imagining a game played in military camps, possibly sharpening minds for real combat. Far to the north, in the icy landscapes of Scandinavia, a very different kind of strategy game was born. By the 4th century AD, Vikings were playing Hnefatafl, a game of unequal forces, where one player defended a king surrounded by loyal warriors, while the other player attacked with a larger army. This wasn't a game of balance. It was a game of survival, echoing the harsh, high-stakes world Vikings actually lived in. Some historians argue Hnefatafl reflected real Norse military thinking, asymmetric warfare, defending the vulnerable center at all costs, though this remains an interpretation rather than a documented fact. Meanwhile, in the vast grasslands of Mongolia, games took a completely different form. Shagai, played using the ankle bones of sheep, became deeply woven into nomadic Mongolian culture. These bones weren't just game pieces. They were tools for storytelling, fortune-telling, and teaching children the value of animals in a herding society. A single bone could represent a horse, a camel, a sheep, or a goat, each with different point values. It wasn't just a game. It was a reflection of an entire way of life. By the 6th century AD, in Persia, a new game called Nard began to spread, a precursor to what we now recognize as backgammon. Persian legend claims Nard was invented specifically to symbolize the movement of celestial bodies, with the board representing the year, the dice representing chance and fate, and the pieces representing the balance between order and chaos. And in Africa, long before many of these games even existed, Mancala had already taken root, with some evidence suggesting origins as early as 1000 BC or earlier. Played by moving seeds or stones between carved pits, Mancala wasn't confined to one culture. It spread across the African continent in dozens of regional variations, each with slightly different rules, yet all sharing the same core idea: count, capture, strategize. The pattern here is hard to ignore. Across very different geographies, civilizations kept arriving at a similar conclusion: that strategy, chance, and competition weren't just entertainment. They connected, in some way, to survival itself. Now here's where the story gets more interesting. Remember Ashtapada, that 8x8 grid from ancient India? Between the 4th and 6th centuries AD, it evolved into a game called Pachisi, often called the national game of India. But Pachisi's framework was about to give rise to something far more significant. By the 6th century AD, a new game emerged from that same 8x8 tradition. A game of kings, elephants, chariots, and foot soldiers, designed to simulate battlefield warfare. Its name was Chaturanga, and Chaturanga would eventually become the direct ancestor of the game, now played by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Chess. But here's a detail that doesn't get talked about as often. Chess didn't stay Indian for long. As trade routes expanded, Chaturanga traveled into Persia, where it transformed into Shatranj. From there, it moved into the Islamic world, then into medieval Europe, changing shape, rules, and even piece names along the way. The queen, now the most powerful piece on the board, wasn't originally powerful at all. In early versions, she could only move one square diagonally. It wasn't until the 15th century, in Europe, that the queen's movement expanded dramatically. Some historians link this shift to the growing political influence of powerful European queens during that era, though this connection is debated rather than confirmed. Meanwhile, in China, a parallel evolution was happening largely independently. By the 3rd century AD, Xiangqi emerged, often called Chinese chess, featuring generals, cannons, and soldiers arranged around a river dividing the board, symbolizing an actual battlefield boundary. Xiangqi and Chaturanga share notable similarities despite developing through mostly separate cultural paths, which raises the same question again. How did so many civilizations arrive, more or less independently, at the same core idea of simulated warfare through strategy? And it doesn't stop there. In medieval England and France, by the 11th century, a game called tables was flourishing among nobility, a direct predecessor to modern backgammon, blending dice, strategy, and social prestige. Around the same era, Nine Men's Morris, first documented in Roman times, was carved into cathedral cloisters across medieval Europe. Monks and clergy, in quiet hours between duties, played this game on the very floors where they prayed. And then there's Fox and Geese, emerging in 14th century in Northern Europe, a deceptively simple game where one player controls a lone fox, hunting a flock of geese controlled by the other. Beneath its playful surface lies a sharp asymmetry, much like Hnefatafl centuries earlier, reflecting a recurring medieval fascination with unequal, high-stakes conflict. So here's a thought worth sitting with. These weren't just games. In many cases, they were mirrors, reflecting war, power, survival, and social hierarchy, wrapped in the form of entertainment. But there's more to this story than just what's on the boards. Not every ancient contest happened on a board. Some happened on open fields, on horseback, in the sky itself. And these physical contests reveal something just as telling about human nature. Take jousting. Emerging in 11th century France, jousting wasn't originally a spectator sport. It began as brutal training for knights preparing for real warfare. Two armored riders, lances leveled, charging at full speed toward one another. Over time, it evolved into elaborate tournaments, complete with pageantry, noble sponsors, and enormous prize money. But it's worth remembering, jousting stayed genuinely dangerous even as sport. King Henry II of France was fatally wounded during a jousting match in 1559, a splinter piercing his eye through his visor. A sport born from war never fully lost its lethal edge. Then there's something even older, dice games, tracing back to Mesopotamia around 3000 BC. Long before casinos, before playing cards, humans were already drawn to chance. Early dice were carved from animal bones, and in many ancient cultures, rolling dice wasn't just gambling. It was believed to reveal the will of the gods. Fate itself, quite literally, in the roll of a bone. Archery competitions stretch back even further into prehistoric times, practiced across nearly every early human civilization. Long before it became a competitive sport, archery was survival, hunting, defense, warfare. The shift from necessity to competition says something about human psychology. We tend to take our survival skills and, over time, turn them into games. The same is true for wrestling, dating back to roughly 3000 BC, found depicted in ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian art. Wrestling may be one of the oldest organized sports in human history, appearing independently across nearly every ancient culture on Earth, because physical combat, stripped of weapons, was one of the purest tests of strength and skill available. Horse racing, emerging around 2000 BC in Central Asia, wasn't just entertainment either. It was closely tied to military capability. Civilizations that mastered horse breeding and riding often held real advantages in warfare and trade. Racing became a public demonstration of a nation's strength, quite literally, on four legs. And finally, falconry, also emerging around 2000 BC in Central Asia, represents something entirely different. Unlike combat sports, falconry required patience, partnership, and a deep understanding between human and animal. It later became a symbol of nobility across medieval Europe and the Islamic world, prestigious enough that owning a trained falcon often indicated a person's rank in society. So here's a realization worth carrying forward across every one of these games and sports, board or battlefield. Very few of them were ever really about entertainment alone. They were about power, status, survival, strategy, fate, and connection. Which raises one last question. If ancient humans encoded so much of themselves into their games, what does that say about the games we still play today? So let's step back for a moment and look at the full picture. From the royal tombs of Ur to the sacred temples of India. From the war camps of Rome to the frozen fjords of Scandinavia. From the grasslands of Mongolia to the cathedral floors of medieval Europe. Every civilization we've explored today, separated by oceans, mountains, centuries, and languages, arrived at a similar conclusion, that games were rarely just games. They were vessels for spirituality, carrying Egyptian souls across Senet's board toward the afterlife. Vessels for warfare, sharpening tactical thinking for Roman soldiers and Norse warriors alike. Vessels for fate, letting Mesopotamian dice speak on behalf of the gods. Vessels for status, elevating falconers and jousting knights into symbols of nobility. And vessels for connection, bringing families and communities together over carved boards for thousands of years. And here's a thought worth taking seriously. Chess, played by hundreds of millions today, carries the lineage of ancient Indian battlefield simulation. Backgammon carries the spirit of Persian cosmology. Go, still played in something close to its original form, connects a modern player to a Chinese strategist from the Han Dynasty. Even Mancala, still played across African communities today, echoes a tradition stretching back over 3,000 years. We didn't invent the desire to compete, to strategize, to test fate, to seek status, or to simply sit across from another human being and connect. We inherited it. It was already ancient long before any of us were born. It will likely outlast every game we currently know. That's the real thread running through all of this. Beneath the surface of entertainment lies something profoundly human. A connection stretching from a pharaoh's tomb to a Viking longhouse, to a Roman military camp, to your living room table tonight. Different boards, different rules, same human hunger. So the next time you sit down for a game night, or watch a chess match, or roll a pair of dice, remember, you're not just playing. You're taking part in one of the oldest, most continuous traditions in human history. One that has survived the fall of empires, the rise and collapse of religions, and the passage of over 5,000 years. If this journey through history surprised you, or changed how you see something as simple as a board game, let us know in the comments. Which ancient game surprised you the most? And if you believe history like this deserves to be remembered, not forgotten, make sure you're subscribed to the Medieval Heritage because this is only the beginning of the stories still waiting to be uncovered.